On this episode of Still Loading, what will you find in the mountain? Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, we are going to be discussing one of my favorite platformers of all time. I played it for the first time a year ago or so. I'm bummed that I did not play this game when it first came out, but I have rectified that wrong, and the game we are talking about today is Celeste. And joining me to discuss Celeste is my friend Ryan Kern. Ryan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for setting aside some time for this. Thank you for coming on the show. I've been looking forward to this, man. I'm really excited to talk about this game. There's a lot to talk about it as well. But before we dive into the gameplay and story and all that good stuff and the arts and everything about this game, quick warning to the listeners. This game doesn't have a crazy amount of story to spoil, but we are going to be spoiling it as the episode goes along. I don't think spoiling the story is going to ruin your enjoyment of the game, but still just wanted to give you all a heads up just in case it mattered to you. So now we move on to the main part of the episode, and that is to start off with personal experiences. So Ryan, I want to throw it over to you, being the first-time guest and the guest of the episode. What was your first experience with Celeste, and what are some of your memories surrounding the game?
Oh man, so I got into Celeste pretty much right after it came out. I remember listening to a podcast actually at the time, and they were talking about it, saying, "Oh, Game of the Year contender! This is fantastic." And I looked at it, and it's when you look at it at first, knowing nothing about it, thinking nothing about it, it was a platformer, and for me, the super hard platformer genre isn't really a thing that sucks me in a lot. But people kept saying, like, "Oh, this is great! It's such a great game! It's so good." So I downloaded it. It wasn't super expensive. It didn't seem like I had a lot to lose. And just everyone was raving about what a fantastic game this was. So this was back 2018. I got it on my Switch, and I connected with the story so deeply from the first time I played it. I mean, the music was great, the story was great, the art was fantastic, and it just really got me in like okay, this is something I want to keep doing. I want to keep playing this, and I keep coming back to it. Probably once or twice a year ever since then, just because it's such an enjoyable time.
For myself, I can understand the not always necessarily enjoying like the super hard platformer genre, Super Meat Boy or other things like that.
Yeah.
I like them for the most part because I like platformers, but I'm with you. Something about Celeste just kind of spoke to me. And I think what I like about it, one, it kind of inadvertently justifies my dislike of Dark Souls. And the reason I say that is because, almost every criticism of Dark Souls is like, oh, you're just, almost every criticism of people who don't like Dark Souls is, oh, you're just bad at the game. You don't like hard games. You like easy games.
I'm so glad this is a safe
space. What, sorry?
I said, I'm so glad this is a safe space. I'm on the same wavelength.
My listeners have heard me rant about my dislike of Dark Souls. I get why people like it, but I'm not going to rehash it all here. But I like to use Celeste as be like, no, you're wrong. I love Celeste, and I've beaten it multiple times, and Celeste is a very hard game. It's
It
a
is.
really, really hard game, especially some of the platforming stuff. Well, I mean, that's pretty much all it is. The game there's no combat in this. Well, sorry, we'll get into all that.
Mm,
I was about to go down a rabbit hole of the gameplay, but my
yeah.
personal experience was I saw some people playing this on either Games Done Quick or on one of the speedrunners Twitch channels. I forget which one. And it might have been like a cross of like Super Mario World using Celeste physics and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, that's what this game is, Celeste. Interesting. Oh, maybe I'll give this a shot. And I tried it out. I bought it same as you, it was relatively cheap, easy to download. And so I picked it up on my Switch and I fell in love with it. Like it scratched an itch that I still wish I could it
Yeah.
scratched an itch that could never fully be scratched. I guess
Yeah.
because at the time we're recording this, I just recorded an episode on Ori and the Blind Forest, which listeners, you're going to be waiting a while for that one by the time this one comes out, just a forewarning. Anyway, then that one is all about like really precise platforming, and Celeste is even more so. So it scratched an itch that I forgot that I had, and it can never be fully scratched because I'm always looking for more experiences like this in gaming. Same with Shovel Knight. Shovel Knight's a good example of that
Shovel
too. Like,
Knight's great. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned speedrunners, which
mhm.
uh, Celeste has such a robust speedrunning community, and it was kind of built to be that. But I feel like those people are like the Olympians. They're the ones that you
Yeah.
watch and they're fantastic. I, as a gamer, think of myself as like that uncle that shows up to play football like once a year on Thanksgiving, and that's like about all the physical activity I do. Like I I enjoy it. I love it. I will, be there, every game night watching the TV. But I'm not I'm not great at it. But it's Celeste is really something different. It's really something that even if you don't think that it's something you want, it's there for you.
You're that uncle that shows up and just you take one snap and you pull a hamstring. You're like, it's fine, it's fine, I got this. just kind of limping back off the field. No, I'm with you though on that. So let's dive into the game in earnest, right? Let's talk
Hmm.
about this. The premise of Celeste is you play as a girl named Madeline who is climbing Mount Celeste, and she does not even know why. At the beginning of the game, she really doesn't know why she's doing it. She kind of does, and she kind of doesn't. What I love about this game is while the story it's light on story, it's heavy in thematic material. There's a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
themes to discuss and break down, and we will do our best to break them down and discuss this. And especially with the journey the creator, Maddie Thorson, went on when she made this game. We'll get into all that. It's it's all tied in with the game so bizarrely perfectly. But you play as Madeline, who has to uh, climb Mount Celeste, and it turns out to be super difficult. And she meets a friend named Theo along the way, this crazy granny who just laughs at her the whole time, just sadistically just laughs at her. Fun fact, by the way, the granny character, when the game was first in its early stages, the only character that existed was the granny character. They designed the first three chapters of the game before the story was really set, and
Hmm.
the granny was the only character who was besides Madeline, I'm assuming, who was in the game, which I think is kind of cool. So yeah,
Yeah.
you travel Mount, you climb Mount Celeste, and that is the basic premise of the game. Is there anything you'd like to add to that though, Ryan?
So many things I want to add to that, but I'm going to keep it basic until we're ready to really dive in.
All right, all right. So let's talk about the platforming and gameplay of this, and we can then use that to segue into the story because it segues bizarrely perfectly as well.
Oh, 100%.
Let's talk about this. So, Ryan, I want to throw it over to you. Talk a little bit about the platforming. What mechanics really stuck out to you, and what do you enjoy about the platforming in this game?
So yeah, I mean, mechanic wise, it's a very, it's simple to understand at first. You get your dash, you get your climb, you get your jump mechanics. Nothing super uncommon. Like it's very Meat Boy or Metroid, Donkey Kong. You get your platformer stuff in there, but the thing I really really like about this game is the times where it introduces new mechanics. It does it in a way that's so intuitive that you can just
Hmm.
understand what you need to do, and I think that's like peak game design. For example, there's the one stage in the Tower of Mirrors, Temple of Mirrors, I think is what it's called.
Hmm.
Um, and the Seekers, the things that kind of come for you. And
Hmm.
when you first get introduced, Madeline goes to sleep, and then you have like a dream or a vision that you are one. And you just get like this short little mini game where you're moving around as a seeker, and you have to break through walls, and that little mini game teaches you that that's how those things are going to pursue you. And it was just such a
Mm.
creative way, without a tooltip, without a little tutorial, like to just let you know, like, hey, I'm adding this new thing to the game, and this is what it's going to do to chase you. And I think that kind of game design is just really interesting, because the first stage gives you those little tooltips. The bird kind of tells you what to do, but
Hmm.
from there it's about like figuring it out, and it's very fair about that. And that's, I think, fairness is kind of going back to how I said I'm not into super hard games. It's not something that really appeals to me, but the gameplay in Celeste is, it's not brutal. It's very
Hmm.
forgiving. It lets you know that, like, it's okay. Try again. I mean, you're really trying to get from one side of the screen to the other, and if you die, worst thing that happens is you poof and then start back on the other side of the screen. Like, there's no message
Exactly.
that pops up and goes, "You died," or anything terrible like that. It's just start over. Just keep trying. Do a little bit better each time.
I'm a fan of games that will, when the penalty for death is very minimal, they make the gameplay harder as kind of a result. So, like, you
Yes.
don't feel bad about dying. It still doesn't make it any easier, but the challenge isn't necessarily in like mental endurance. It's more of physical. It's more of skill as opposed to like
Yes.
endurance, and that's what it feels like a lot of times with um, some other difficult games. Like there'll be super challenging sections. Don't get me wrong, but if they keep making sending you back super far, now the challenge feels more about your endurance to replay the same stuff that you've already seen 1,000 times, just to get, spend 5 minutes just to get back to the spot you died at the first time. Versus in Celeste, it's not, the penalty isn't that waste of time. It is like you're right back into it. It's still just as difficult as before, but the respawn point is significantly much more fair. And even so, if you backtrack on purpose, if you go back to a previous spot that you've already been, you can die in that spot and it'll still reset you to somewhere else in that spot. So there's still it, like, because it's still exploratory, that I'm happy they didn't make the penalty for death like go back to the beginning of the level, because oh my god, some of
Mhm.
these levels are pretty sprawling at
Oh
times.
yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. I mean, it encourages you to try, right? It's not, hey, think before you jump. It's jump. Hey, that didn't work out. Look at it again. And you just keep doing that, and you get a little bit. And there's even a tooltip that pops up that says, hey, don't be ashamed of your death count. Like that just, those are all times that you've learned. That's all stuff you're doing a little bit better each time. And that's just so much gentler of an approach. And I think that's what really makes this a game for anyone.
And that death counter will tie into the thematic material, the themes of this game super well as it goes on. But it's almost interesting that they kind of turn the death counter on its head, where instead of being like something to be ashamed of, it's almost a badge of honor. Like
Mm-hmm.
they treat it like the higher death count you're, like, yeah, you tried harder than anybody else. Like the more deaths you have, if you think about it, the more deaths you had means you tried harder than anyone else, or than your friends or something, whatever it may be. Um,
Right.
it's kind of a cool twist on that, which I really enjoy. And the other thing that's interesting about the mechanics, they don't, in terms of the abilities that Celeste gets, she has the same abilities. Not Celeste. I'm sorry, Madeline. I keep doing that. The In terms of the abilities that Madeline gets, she has the same abilities throughout the entire game until chapter 7,
Hmm.
when she get like, you have, your jump and dash, and in chapter 7 you get 2 dashes before you have to recharge on a ledge.
Right.
And that's it. Where they iterate on those ideas is through the environment, and each chapter has something different. So for example, chapter 1, Forsaken City, it is all just your basic platform, and I don't mean basic in a negative way. If anything, it has springs, and what you find out by the springs is that every time you land on a spring, it resets your dash. So like, normally you only get one dash in midair, and the way that you can get your dash back is you have to land on solid ground, or something else has to happen. And one of those other things that has to happen is you can hit a spring, and it doesn't matter which direction the spring is. If it's going left or right or up or down, it will reset your dash mechanic, your dash skill, and that teaches you just that little bit. In chapter 2, they have these weird, it almost looks like funfetti blocks or something like that. It's
Yeah.
space and funfetti, and Celeste will zoom
Very
through
quick
them like,
funfetti.
what? Sorry.
It's very, very quick funfetti. You can just
Yes.
zip through it.
um, well, Celeste will dash through it, and that also, once you come out the other side, it also resets your dash. But if the block is super long, Celeste will dash through the whole thing, and you have to be careful, because if you dash, you can't change direction once you start dashing through this like space block thing. And so if there's a wall in front of you, you're crashing into it and dying. And each level seems to add stuff to that. Like, for you, Ryan, what was some of your favorite environmental mechanics? Because I wouldn't say they're like challenges for per se, but I would say these are more mechanics. Like, they, instead of Celeste getting game mechanics, they use the environment to give Celeste. Oh my gosh, I keep saying Celeste. Give
I'm also
Madeline more.
I almost like that. It's because it tying into the story and themes of it all. It's almost like, yeah, you know what, Celeste could be kind of a representation of Madeline going through it, but
I'm just mad that I keep calling her Celeste. Anyway, sorry. So I don't want to read
not
all
if
of
you
them
think
off
Zelda
because
is the green guy. No, just
he's not. What are you talking about? Uh, I named my son after Zelda. No, I'm just kidding. Um, but yeah, what are some of your favorite like environmental mechanics that they throw at you throughout the game? And you can continue to list these off. I think we should at least list all of them at some point. So yeah, sorry. Throwing it over to you. Your favorite environmental mechanics.
right. So, I mentioned the Seekers and the Temple of Mirrors,
Hmm.
but I also like in the resort levels when you have your climb mechanic that you're used to doing, or your slides that you normally do. But then it adds that whole element of that, like, darkness grows around it after you've touched the surface.
Hmm.
Um, and that's kind of that's really interesting to me. The thing that's always going to come back to me is metaphor and the art of everything and just how it goes, but like how that ties to the story and just feeling not claustrophobic, because that makes it sound like it's a terrible experience to go through, but it does feel like, as you're moving, you have to keep going. You have to keep pushing through because this darkness is kind of closing in on you. And just environmentally, that is such a cool aspect of it. And it creates that mechanic of, whereas normally, as long as you're not a speed runner, you can stop on the platform and think about it and then do another dash. But when you have this, it's more try to make everything happen in one fluid movement from one side of the screen to the other. And I think that's really cool.
I agreed. And that darkness. Sorry, I'm still thinking about the darkness thing. Uh, you know, then I was trying to when I was thinking about making I believe in a thing called love reference, and I thought better of it. But uh,
And that
I
song's like 20 years old now. Can you believe that? That's I don't
I
I
I
don't
don't
want to
even want
think
to
about
think
it.
about that. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
that's don't it's not true. That's not what's happening. The singer of the darkness doesn't have a YouTube channel now that he just reacts to other people either. That's not a thing that's happening. That's so weird. Um, I one of my favorite like environmental mechanics. I would have to say, hmm, I think it's the those red like those green orbs that you can go into and like launch you in a direction, and then it refreshes uh your dash as well. I always thought that was kind of cool because there was a lot of really interesting like sections where you would see a room and it was just nothing but air. Like there's no platforms for you to land on, but you would see orbs all over the place. And so you knew you had to figure out the pattern to dodge all the spikes and be able to go through this whole really difficult section and then come back to it and then come back to the beginning to get like some strawberry or something. I
Mhm.
forgot to mention you can collect strawberries in this. They're not important. You don't need
Yep.
to do
They're
any of them.
bragging rights,
Exactly. Though you do make a banging strawberry pie at the end of the game depending on how many strawberries you get.
which I can confirm as somebody who did a playthrough where I just ignored the strawberries. They don't like the pie. Everyone goes like, I don't know if I can eat this, Madeline. Like it's if you don't get enough strawberries, the pie doesn't come out very well.
So maybe the strawberries do matter, huh, game
If you want
developers?
to make your friends a delicious pie, make sure you get the strawberries on the way. That's the only advice I can give to someone who hasn't played yet.
I was pretty happy this playthrough that I for this in preparation for this, I actually got 99 on
Oh,
my main playthrough. It got a little over 100 after some subsequent plays. There's some playing through some of the levels again, though I still couldn't. I didn't realize that after chapter 7 there was two others. You mentioned them in our messages before we were recording.
mhm.
I was like, oh well, it's no big deal. And for like, it seems like there's some actual story moments. There's a chapter 9 is called Farewell, and I have no
Okay.
idea
Yeah.
what that is. Do you know what happens in chapters 8 and 9?
So chapters 8 and 9 were the post-launch content. That stuff that came, after the game was already out. The farewell DLC was uh, really good story-wise, but also very difficult. Um,
Hmm.
it's a very long, continuous process. And I mentioned being the uncle who, only plays football on Thanksgiving and tears a hamstring, limps out of there. It was hard to get through, but it's it did add a lot, and that we talked about, Maddie Thorson and her transition and personally, and I think the farewell DLC reflects a lot more of that, because when the game first launched she wasn't entirely aware that that was the kind of story that she was telling. I mean, this game has evolved with her as she was going. I mean, you talked about how they had the first 3 chapters written, and Granny was the only character, and then
Hmm.
they came back and had more story later. And a lot of that was Maddie realizing as things went on that she wanted to add more of her own personal experiences creating the game and her own torment that was inside of her own feelings. Um, so the post-launch content came after Maddie came out as trans, and it was, I think, a lot. It was a very personal story because that was the point where Maddie can really put herself into Madeline, and I think
Hmm.
it's definitely worth playing. It's hard, but it's
I
there.
I need to get around to it at some point because to unlock chapter 8, you have to find like a bunch of hidden, like I think like four
Yes.
hidden objects throughout the main game. I actually found one of them, and I don't know which levels the others are in. Otherwise, like I was trying to explore around at least in one of them, and I just I couldn't find them. But I'll try to maybe I'll look up where they're at and then just try to get through it afterwards. But
Mhm.
um yeah, and I think we could transition now into talking about the story and the thematic material. Actually, you know what? Hold on. Before we do that, because that I feel like that's going to be like that's going to be the crux of our conversation. That's going to be the primary thing we're going to be talking about here. Let's at least talk about, and because we don't want to give short shrift at the end of this, the
Mm.
visuals and the music. We should at least
Okay.
talk about that. The visuals, I love the visuals of the game. I wouldn't say this game is beautiful. I just because I just did that episode on Ori. Like Ori is stunning. Like Ori I mentioned in the episode that you all won't hear for a couple months. It's like a Thomas Kincaid painting almost combined with like Miyazaki just like come to life. Right? Like it's this
That's very apt, I would say. Yeah.
right? This is much more the art is great, don't get me wrong. Like it's all appealing, but as opposed to like this picturesque thing, it's very 8-bit ish. It's very video gamey. It looks great. Like the graphics are great, but in terms of just like are they stunning? I wouldn't quite say that. I feel like I'm making it sound like I think they're bad. I don't. I think this game looks really good. But
All right. Well,
it
I can come in here and be the
yeah,
white knight for the art style here.
do it.
Well, I will give you that Ori is fantastic. I mean, Ori is its own level of artistic brilliance, but Celeste, I really admire for what it does with the style that it took and the pixel art in it, um, that
Mm,
Pedro Medeiros was able to throw together. I think Null did some of that as well, but it just it's so detailed. For how minimalist it is. Now, like pixel art, you only ever really get so much that you can do with, but you can really in a lot of the scenes detect just these minute facial expressions, especially like uh, on Madeline, you'll see her hands move to her face or her
mm-hmm.
facial expression change. Um, and the scenery just in everything is the color palette they chose uh, was perfect. I think for the tones and the themes it was trying to display, it was very bright at times, but also it blends together, and that kind of illustrates this mountain, this weather beaten mountain that needs to be climbed. But at the same time, it's colorful. It doesn't just doom you with like blues and grays, and that's all you ever get. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think as far as pixel art goes, and especially compared to the growth that it has made from the original Pico 8 game, the Celeste Classic, as you can play it now for free. Um, that was very much just your 8-bit. You had the colors you had. This really just puts a lot of detail into just everything, and again
Yeah.
within the restraints of the art style.
And I feel like I normally I do a bunch of fun facts at the beginning of the episode, and I completely forgot to do that. And you mentioning the Pico 8 thing reminded me of it. Yeah, this game started as a Pico 8 title, and Pico 8, for those who don't know, is a game engine that you can pay for. It. It's kind of I don't know too much about it, but it seems like a really simple bare bones engine. Not to insult it or anything. I think it gives developers just enough of what they need, type of thing.
Right.
But you could only have 30 screens, and there's only 16 colors available for them to use in the Pico 8 version. And to kind of go against it, I think the reason I was like even sounding even somewhat critical of the visuals is just because I was so used to Ori at the time, because I just played that. But like this game really does look really, really nice, especially for the art style that they're going for. There, like you said, I think you're right. There's a ton of different colors. I'm even looking at a still shot of like where you see what is it? Like all of the I forget. There's like a section where you almost looks like I guess you can listen to some of the B sides in it. There's like a play button, a pause button, and an eject button. I don't know exactly. It's on one of the hidden in one of the levels. I don't know what it's for exactly,
Mhm.
but it's like all green and all the grass looks great. That there's a bunch of cool effects with the lighting in it. The game really does look really nice. So as much as I was giving it shit, like I can't deny some of the visuals are just like really, really pretty. And I think the fact that Madeline's sprite is so simplistic helps the rest of the world stand out, which is kind of cool. Um, and
Yeah.
some other quick fun facts. I've already mentioned about the what is it? I already mentioned about the granny character, excuse me, only existed it was the first character that existed. The music that we're going to talk about in just a moment as well, that ties really well in with this whole game's aesthetic, by Lena Raine. They found her through SoundCloud. They just
Hmm.
they heard her music and was like, we like this, and then reached out to her, and that was it. Like there was nothing more to it. They just reached out to her, then liked her shit. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. Lena Raine, I can talk about how much I love that. I have it on vinyl. I,
Oh wow, okay.
I love the soundtrack of this game, and I love how well, like you mentioned, it ties in to the art. It really sets the mood for everything that's going on so well. Um, Not only that, the sound design is fantastic, and the music can speed up and slow down with the game based on what's
Mm-hmm.
happening. Um, Silence is placed at just like the perfect moments as well. It really just emphasizes the emotional dialogue that happens throughout the game. But Lena, I know they gave her free reign to just
No
create the
pun intended.
soundtrack. Yeah, Lena free reign, uh, and she knocked it out of the park. And yeah, as you said, they found her on SoundCloud, really liked her stuff, and she ended up going with it. And now she's making stuff for Minecraft and Guild Wars 2. Like, it's really blown up since then.
What I love about her score for this, to her soundtrack for this, is that it would have been so easy to make it sound like any other NES style game.
Mm-hmm.
And Um, I this is going to sound like I'm throwing shade at Shovel Knight, but Shovel Knight sounds like a game that, like, when you see Shovel Knight and you hear the soundtrack, it sounds like that soundtrack. You're like, yeah, that makes sense. It's one of the
Right.
best soundtracks of all time. Like fucking, uh, oh my gosh, Jake Kaufman is amazing. Like, I love the soundtrack to Shovel Knight, so I don't want it to be misconstrued as me disliking it. But like, when you hear the Shovel Knight soundtrack, it sounds like a game that you would like. You can see that the visuals and that match up perfectly. If you were to listen to the Celeste soundtrack outside of the game, you would know it's video game inspired, because it's got like chip tuned sounds in, like, used
Mm-hmm.
for the melody and used for like different moments, but it doesn't sound like any 8-bit game that you've ever seen. It has its own very unique style and very unique blend of elements. Like, there's a lot of um, I would say, like, sometimes she uses like dissonant sounds to like kind of make it feel more, a little bit more like alien at times, and
Oh, very
the
much.
whole
Yeah.
thing, it's great. It's an absolutely phenomenal soundtrack. Um, the there. What's cool about it too is that there is a melody that is pretty strong that you can hear throughout that dun 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 dun, 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 but she'll iterate on that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's a happier version of it. Sometimes it's a sadder version of it. Sometimes it's a more anxious version of it. She's able to convey a lot of Madeline's emotions as the game goes on through the way that she uses, I guess it's a leitmotif, um, of that
Mm-hmm.
main melody, but it's never like, it never feels like it's brought to the forefront. Like, you almost forget that you're hearing a weird version of that melody as you play through it. Like, I don't know. Do you agree with that? Like,
Oh, I agree
you're more
completely.
of a music guy than I am, so I want to know your thoughts.
No, and you mentioned the the dissonance that gets thrown in there and stuff like, and it's very ambient. It really sets the, like, again, it ties to the environment so closely. And you mentioned that repeated motif, and but it feels unique. It doesn't feel like we're just hearing a slower version, but as I was saying, with it tying to the emotional dialogue and emphasizing that, you really do get the emotion of the characters and the emotion of the scene in that. Um, and going back to what you were saying, again, we'll not throwing Shovel Knight under the bus, because again, as you said, that is fantastic. Um, but you're right. This is absolutely a soundtrack that I can forget is a video game soundtrack. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it exists. I mentioned having it on vinyl. I like to listen to it. I also have it digitally purchased. I got it through Lena's Bandcamp. um, and I listen to it at the gym. You can put that soundtrack on.
Mm-hmm.
It's great for treadmilling or whatever else. It's just so it, it's got the chip tune, like you said, but it carries such a not complex because it still is kind of simplistic, but it's much more than you would expect from just an 8-bit game, and I really
Yeah,
really like it for that. I mean, Resurrections was the breakout track. That's the one that everyone always talks about, but you can go through the entire soundtrack, and every single song has its major standout moments.
agreed. And each track really complements the level that it's designed for. Like the visuals, I mean, so the more dissonant the track, generally it's like, especially in like Oshiro's hotel, like I think that's chapter 3, like
Yes.
as that level goes on, and especially the mirror temple one where Celeste sees her alter ego, like her the
Oh
quote
yeah,
unquote
yeah. The
dark
part
side
of
of
me,
herself.
yeah, or
Yeah.
battling, as the fans have started calling her.
Wait, what? Sorry.
So yeah, the game refers to her as part of me is the character's name because it is part of Madeline. But
Hmm.
the fan base, we've coined the term Badeline
Bad.
as the character's name.
I sorry. I feel so sad that I missed that you saying that the first time. Battling. That's funny.
Badeline.
Um, I don't have much else to say about the visuals and the sound. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that? Is there anything that we didn't touch on before we get into the
Uh,
overall story and thematic stuff?
the only thing I can really throw in there is, I mean, we did talk about the art style and your criticisms again coming from Ori, and I just kind of threw out all the stuff. I will say there is a range. I mean, sometimes it does have the typical restrictions that you do find in the pixel art style. Like you mentioned Oshiro's Resort, and you're going through that, and one of the big things you do there is you have to help him clean up all the clutter, which I mean, in itself is kind of
Mhm.
an allegory, but it manifests as just piles of books and towels and stuff like that all over the place. The art style does make it hard to convey what that is at times. Like I'm cleaning up piles of spirals and things folded in half.
Yeah.
Like you can use your imagination and piece that together. But so there's definitely a range. Some things um, do feel very video gamey and pixelated. But I mean, I mentioned Madeline's character. You can look at her and just subtle movements happen during the panic attack scenes. You can see that on Madeline's face, and for being such a small little character on the screen, the fact that they're able to portray that, uh, it's just amazing.
Really good art direction to be able to do that. Like that's really what it boils down to. You have to have phenomenal art direction to be able to take a sprite like Madeline's and be able to convey like really intense emotions like that. And I think that I should really almost knock myself for comparing the art style to Ori, because they're two games trying to do very different things. It would be, like I mentioned before, Dark Souls. It'd be like comparing this game's art like direction to Dark Souls art direction. They're very different. They're going for extremely different aesthetics and extremely different purposes. So I think I like, it's not fair to this game that I was comparing it to Ori, because this game, the developers and the artists aren't trying to make a cartoon come to life. They're not trying to make some hyper realistic visual graphics or something like that. They're trying to make a pixel art game, a pixel art platformer, and judging it based off them trying to make a pixel art platformer, this game looks beautiful. Especially like the backgrounds, the parallax scrolling that you see
Mhm.
periodically. There's a really pretty moment like when you get midway up and you see like the northern lights on the top of it. Like that's
Oh
really
yes.
pretty. There's lots of really nice moments. And I think the overall, like, the way they choose each level's theme, like the first level or the first chapter, which is called Forsaken City, there's lots of like, almost looks like, construction beams and stuff like that is all over the place. It's a lot more or it's a lot more like what's the I was about to say urban, not urban, but like a machinery, I guess, is for lack of a better term. It's more machine like. There's lots of like construction. That's it. The construction vibe. There you go. That's what I
Well,
was trying to get at.
and that is absolutely there. And I mean, you mentioned the parallax backgrounds, and especially in Forsaken City and stuff like that. There'll be billboards and stuff, just real commercial advertisements that you'll see in the background. I think one of them says, "Are you ready for the beach?" And it shows like a skinny model in a bikini like in the background. And I think that, I mean, thematically also kind of plays into like insecurities and body image issues and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. So the fact that like they could even throw subtle things in there, and it's very subtle, like it's not pronounced, it's just a different color on the background, but you can see it and read it, and it really it tells a lot of story that way.
Well, and in speaking of the story, Ryan, I think we should dive into the story and its thematic material. Um, I think what would be a good way to handle this is just give a real brief overview of the story, and then we can dive into the finer points, just so that way
Mhm.
the listeners have a greater like they understand the greater context of the story itself. But as a quick aside, just to get it out of the way, Madeline wants to climb Mount Celeste. Like I said at the beginning, she doesn't quite know why. And she talks to the granny at the top of the mountain, and she talks to her friend Theo, he reveals to her that his grandfather also climbed the mountain. You kind of find out that people who are lost, not necessarily like lost or trying to find their way like to a specific location, but lost in themselves. They come to this mountain trying to find purpose. They want to do something. They want to prove something to themselves in some way, shape, or form. And Madeline isn't quite sure what she's trying to prove to herself. And neither her nor Theo really understand that in the beginning, but obviously as the game progresses, they start to understand. They get to this in chapter 3. They get to this hotel, and the chapter is called Celestial Resort, and you meet Mr. Oshiro, who is a ghost who is like the keeper of this hotel. And it's very clear the hotel has not been in use for quite some time, and you have to help him clean it up. But you also in this hotel, you see a mirror of yourself. That actually might be in chapter 2 in the old side. I don't remember which chapter you get this in. You see Badeline as you described her, and but as the game goes on, you meet the evil side of you, Badeline, as we described, and she kind of sabotages you throughout. But if you pay attention to the dialogue, there's a little bit more. It's not quite that direct. It's not quite as simple as her sabotaging you, but she sabotages you. She makes fun of Mr. Oshiro, who then goes on a rampage, and you have to run away from him. She criticizes you every chance you get, and Madeline essentially has to fight her way up to the top of Mount Celeste. And I'm going to go up to this point, and then I want to throw it over to you, Ryan, up to pretty much chapter 5 and 6. Because at 5, you get up really high on the mountain, and you basically tell
Mhm.
your alter ego, "I don't need you anymore. Like you're nothing. You do nothing but hurt me. I don't want you anymore." And so she has a freak out and throws you down to the bottom of the mountain, and that's kind of where the more emotional part of the journey begins. I'm going to throw it over to you, Ryan, to kind of explain the last little bit, and then you can feel free to dive into some of the thematic stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so that point that you mentioned there, where Madeline tries to explain to Madeline, the part of her, that she understands now that she needs to get rid of her. She
Mm-hmm.
explains, "I need to set you free. I'm letting you go." Um, and Madeline doesn't like that. Madeline reacts very poorly, and as you said, throws her from the mountain, sends all of the progress all the way back because she
Mm-hmm.
drops to the very bottom of the mountain. Um, from there, Madeline has to come to terms, and Granny, the one who's been laughing at her the whole time, also serves in this mentor role capacity, because she kind of gives her some of that insight, and Madeline then reconciles with Madeline and realizes that no, I need to accept you. You are part of me. You're not something I need to get rid of. You're not something that I'm just magically going to be free from. You are me. You're part of me. And from then on, they combine their powers basically, and start working together,
Mm-hmm.
and very quickly are able to scale back up the mountain once Madeline accepts that part of her. And it's very, and that's when, as you mentioned, you get, for most of the game, you just have your one dash and then you need to recharge, and then you get two dashes and can recharge after that
Yep.
happens. And that helps Madeline climb all the way to the summit. You get a beautiful art piece, come back down, credits roll, meet with your friends. But it's very important in the story that it's not over, right? It's not magically resolved just because Madeline made it to the top of the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was something that Maddy said that she wanted, from the story, was she didn't want to make a story where Madeline's just magically better. She just did this thing and it's all over. But instead, she learns this really valuable lesson about making peace with herself. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that is a huge theme throughout this entire game, is that that forgiveness and acceptance of yourself. Um, which I think ties really well into kind of discussing the deeper themes throughout the entire game. Um, I mean, this is a story about mental health. This is at
Yep.
times a pretty heavy-handed allegory. I mean, you can see right through it exactly where it's going. Um, Once you get through the Forsaken City level, you get to that memorial, and I think that's a very, for me personally, that was a very deep moment, and it happened so early in the game. But you reach a memorial that says this memorial is dedicated to those who perished on the climb. Um, and being a story about anxiety and depression,
Yeah.
healing, forgiveness, acceptance, that's a very powerful moment. Um, the mountain itself, you know, it's that big thing that Madeline tells herself that she needs to overcome. She doesn't know why. She just needs to keep going. And the entire time, people are telling her to give up. It's easier just to give up. Don't do it. But
Mm-hmm.
she feels like she needs to do that. And even Battle, in the part of her, is also, like you said, telling her no, trying to dissuade her, trying to, why are you even doing this? You're stupid. You shouldn't do this at all. Um, it's not a story about beating your depression into submission. It's about accepting it. It's about accepting it as part of you and learning to coexist with your anxiety, coexist with your depression, which is the part of the story that has resonated very deeply with me.
it I think you bring up so many good points. So specifically with the learning to live with your depression, I don't have clinical depression. I don't I'm pretty sure I have clinical anxiety, but I don't have clinical depression. But someone super important to me does. And I understood it well before this game, but it still took me a while where I, you know, I said some unintentionally hurtful things like, oh well, eventually you can just get off antidepressants, right? Like you'll be able to, and I didn't mean it that way, but this game really illustrates the point where y- like I don't know, maybe I'm an optimist. I believe that maybe there's a 1 in a million chance that not quote unquote cure depression. I don't mean it like that, but I always feel like there has to be at least something out there that can help you where it's not like this ever looming presence. But by and large, that's not the case. That's just me being an
Mhm.
unreal, like that's unreal optimism, and I understand that to an extent. Um, and this game kind of helped me find a way to express that, like to understand that even more so, where the darker sides of yourself, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, whether it's things that you hide from everyone else. Like this game is about you coming to grips with those parts of you that you don't let others see. Um, and it's super powerful. It really is. And I didn't realize it when I first played it per se until the spot where you Madeline and Badeline join forces, and it's not even just the fact that you get an additional dash. There are specific parts of it where there are these pink or purple orbs, sorry, and you've seen orbs before in the game. There's green orbs that you would go inside the bubble and they would,
Mhm.
you pick a direction and they'll launch you in the direction, and then it also refreshes your dash ability. In this, however, it's not you going into an orb, it's you holding hands with your the dark half of yourself, and you're pulling each other up together. And it's almost realizing that what I love about this metaphor is that it's almost like you realize that the bad parts of you aren't necessarily bad. Like they're there for a reason, and you just have to figure out how to use them, you know. uh
Mhm.
I'm not saying depression is necessarily like that, but I feel like there are
It
definitely.
is though, and you're absolutely on the right path. I mean,
Mm,
as someone with depression, it it's not something that will ever go away, because it's not, oh, I'm sad because I don't have this, or it's not, I'm sad. It's part of you. It's a chemical part of your brain. It's your
yep.
psychology. Um, and even though every time you think about it, or the things that you do, or how you behave, or stuff like that, you think, this is an awful part of me, I just want it gone, I don't want to feel like this, I don't want to be this person. It really does feel like it's that bad side of you, that part that when you meet somebody, you don't want to show them
Hmm.
that battling. You don't want to show them the part of you that is this darkness, and this, you
Yeah.
want to show them the good part. Um, and if there was a way to just magically go, oh, I just need to set my depression free and then it's gone, anyone would do that in a heartbeat. But you can't. That's not how it works. Um,
Hmm.
and that's why I think it's so good that this is a story about how even when she reaches the top of the mountain, it's not over. She's just learned to accept herself. She's learned to stop beating herself up for her depression, and she's
Hmm.
learning how to coexist with it, how to manage it, how to make it understand that it is a part of her and what she can do. Um, and that's the real growth that happens on this journey. Um, and I think that telling a story that is that real, and Maddie has mentioned that they didn't consult any professionals when they made this. This was not something that they went and talked to psychologists about, how can we best represent depression. Maddie told the story about her feelings, about what she goes through and the struggles, and she even said it was really difficult making this game and coming to the realizations that I wanted to tell in this story, and then still having to push myself to finish the game, realizing that I was overworking myself and that was, hindering my well-being, but then telling myself I had to keep doing it.
Hmm.
Um, it's a really good, just, and if you go on YouTube and you look up Celeste, you'll find dozens of video essays that people have made about how Celeste has changed their life, or how it's helped them overcome some grief in some way, because it really does give you, even if it's not the optimistic message that you can be cured and it's suddenly better, it gives you the optimistic message that there's always hope, and just keep trying and keep going and push forward.
And
Um,
I also think it normalizes something where, and it's you only use the word because I said it before, but it's something that the person that I deeply care about has instructed me. No one who has depression needs to be cured. Like depression isn't something that is an ailment. It's you're not like you don't say like You don't like if someone's suffering, from like a broken leg, you don't just say, I'm going to cure your broken leg.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Oh my gosh, like an illness that is ever present. I can't think of the actual term. Not terminal, not death, but like something where you're chronic. There we go. For fuck's
chronic.
sake,
Yes,
chronic illness. It you someone isn't cured from their chronic illness. It's managed. Um,
yes,
and it's a problem. It's a bad phrase that I use where it's like, oh, I want you, if by you getting your depression to go away, you're suddenly cured. No, it's not necessarily cured. It's just that you've learned how to manage it at this point. You know how it works, and I I think what's beautiful about this game is that alter ego, the dark side of yourself. While it was clearly meant for depression, you can apply that to anything. Like I didn't know it was necessarily about depression when I played this game. I just applied it to the parts of me that I just don't like about myself, the things I can't stand about who I am. And it learning to live with the bad parts of you, acknowledging them and working on them while also not letting them define you, I think is super important. Because sometimes I hate it when I see people online who go, like, these are my flaws, but I'm just going to be me type of thing. It's like,
hmm
well, listen, if you acknowledge that something is a flaw, that it has a negative impact on other people, I'm not saying that you need to beat yourself up for it by any stretch. Like, you need to give yourself grace, but at the same time, that's not an excuse to be like, well, fuck it. I'm not going to do anything about it. Like, who cares that I'm putting my partner into like mental health crises because I can't handle my own shit type of thing. Like, there is a level of responsibility, but at the same time, what this game shows is you don't ignore it, you don't hide from it, but you give yourself grace to acknowledge that it's there. And
yes.
you can learn from it from here on out. There's listeners of my show are going to be laugh at me for this. I have to bring up Bluey now almost all the time. Have you ever watched Bluey, Ryan?
I have watched Bluey. It's fantastic. I don't even have kids. I watch Bluey. It's fantastic.
You don't need an excuse. One of my closest friends introduced me to Bluey. Said, "No shit, you don't have to worry about that." He also doesn't have any kids, but there's an episode of Bluey called Bad Mood, and it's an episode where Bingo's, the one kid Bingo is in a bad mood, and the it's for a silly kid reason, quote unquote. Like her mom says, you're being cheeky, not that you're a cheeky kid, but you're being cheeky. You're being a little mischievous, and Bingo takes it as like, I'm not a cheeky kid. She's like, no, you're a good kid, but you're being cheeky. And she's like, there's a difference. And Bingo's all sad. It's like, no, there isn't. And so the whole episode is her in a bad mood, which is represented by her dad, Bandit, pretending like wearing this Viking helmet and walking around just smashing things. And the episode ends where uh basically she's she's able to get out of the bad mood by tiring it out, or tiring her dad out, and she wants to go give her bad mood a hug, and her sister Bluey goes, well, why would you want to do that? He's bad. He's like, no, he isn't bad. He was just being bad. And so when she goes to hug her bad mood, the dark side of herself, if we're bringing this back to Madeline, the helmet falls off, and there's a smile, and their tails start wagging. So it's showing acceptance of the dark side of yourself, even in a kids show, which is, it's wild to me that they even cover this like it just subtly in the show. But even in a kids shows how important that is. Like you don't have to necessarily shun away the bad parts of you, but it's something you have to acknowledge and work with, type of thing. Sorry, I went on a whole tangent there.
No, no, that's 100% fitting as well, because that, I mean, all right, Bluey copied Celeste, confirmed. I mean, that is the overall thing. And I wrote down here one YouTube comment I saw on a Celeste clip, and the person said that Celeste is more than a game. It's an experience and a heartfelt story about learning to coexist with your depression instead of running away from it. And that, I mean, that's what we've been talking about here. Is the game is, again, it's you're being a cheeky kid. You're not a cheeky kid. But it's part of you, and you need to accept that. Um, and you talked a little bit before, and I wanted to circle back to the Oshiro storyline that happens in there, because that is such a relatable little side story for me in this game. Because basically, what happens in the resort is Madeline encounters Oshiro. He's this ghost. He's got all of these problems. His resort is in disarray. He's had no guests. He and he's just so anxious and self-doubting, and
Mm-hmm.
Madeline just has this compulsion to help him. She wants to help this guy who has all of these issues. She wants to make his life better, because in some way she feels like that's the right thing to do. She feels like that's what she needs to do to make, things right. So she puts her own goals on hold. She stops climbing the mountain. She stops focusing on
Mm.
what she needs to do, and she goes and she helps Mr. Oshiro clean up. And ultimately, Madeline resurfaces. And this is, the part of her, because she didn't take the time to figure herself out and she put herself on hold. Now Madeline appears to say all of these mean things to Mr. Oshiro, who then completely turns. This is an I can fix him kind of cautionary tale
Mm.
as well, because as soon as Madeline pulls away at all, Oshiro turns into a, you never cared about me. You never did anything for me. You just wanted to make yourself feel better. You're a terrible person. I can't stand you. And that's when he turns into a monster and chases her out of the resort. Um, and even later in the game, when Madeline and the dark part of her are reconciling, Madeline does say, she gets Madeline to apologize for treating Mr. Oshiro the way she did, but Madeline acknowledges, I'm still mad at him. He shouldn't have reacted that way. But she accepts that she shouldn't have put her own well-being on hold to try to help him, because it was going to be doomed from the start. And that's a good side story on, you can't solve your own issues through other people. You need to
Mm.
learn to heal yourself. And even though helping others heal can feel good, and helping others heal can be a distraction for sure. I mean, Madeline wasn't thinking about how she needed to climb that mountain for a bit. She was totally distracted from all of it until it blew up in her face. Um, and I think that's another really relatable side story. Uh, and I was really glad that that was included in the game.
I think it's also important to note that I didn't see. I didn't even know. I didn't pick up on that, and I really like that analysis there. And I think it's also important to note, though, that at least from my own experience, I have found that you can end up helping yourself and figure out yourself by helping others, but
Mm-hmm.
that is not a guaranteed thing. If it is a detriment to you, like it was in Madeline's case here, where her ultimate goal here was to climb the mountain. And we're not talking like, oh, I needed to help out a friend here. And like for all intents and purposes, climbing the mountain for Madeline was a life and death scenario. Like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe not life or death, maybe that's a little too dramatic, but it was a very important thing to do for her. Like, it was something that was a necessity for her. Um, and so, yeah, she shouldn't have taken the time right now to help Mr. Oshiro, who literally, like, if you take 2 seconds, you should have realized you can't help him. He is absorbed in his own world right now.
Yes.
Um, still, he's still dealing with his own stuff. So, is it possible that you can help yourself by helping others? I believe that 100% because I've seen it for myself. However, that should not be the go-to. That should not be, it's not guaranteed. And on top of that, you never know, because if the person that you're trying if you're trying to help people because you genuinely want to help people, that's one thing. But I think what you said, I'm recalling it again now, I think is the perfect example as to why it didn't work in the situation. Madeline wasn't trying to help Mr. Oshiro to just for the sake of helping him. She wanted to fix him.
Yes.
And that is you can't, as you said, you can't fix someone else unless you can fix yourself. I shouldn't say fix yourself, but like unless before you help yourself. Same thing how like, if you're studying to be a psychologist or a therapist, you have to know your own baggage before you start taking clients, because how can you expect to help other people if you don't even understand how to manage yourself?
I think a really good contrast to kind of play into the point that you were making there about how helping people can benefit you. There's healthy ways and unhealthy ways to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If you think later in the game, when Theo gets encased in a diamond and Madeline has to rescue him and carry him out of there. Now, this is an instance where Theo needs help. He needs to be carried. He needs to be literally carried and taken through the level and dropped off. And Madeline is not putting herself on hold to help a friend. They are still moving in the right direction. They're still going together. She is still assisting someone. Um, the big difference with Mr. Oshiro is that he was not helping himself. He was, as you said, lost in his own world, doing his own things. And Madeline stopped what she was doing. She stopped moving forward to help this person, and ultimately it blew up in her face.
Mm-hmm.
It was a waste of her, not a waste of her energy, but it was wasting her energy. She was, rather than moving towards what was going to help her and her goals, she just hit the pause button and thought, maybe me helping this guy is going to make me feel better. Versus Theo as a character, his entire point as the character is to be the friend. Theo is the comic relief. He's a friend. He's understanding. He helps Madeline through a panic attack by teaching her the feather trick, which
Mm-hmm.
becomes a gameplay mechanic because then all the feathers appear throughout the rest of the game. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but at no point was Theo held down by his, not held in place by his own issues, right? He did have his own uh reasons for wanting to climb the mountain. You mentioned his grandfather, and he brings up his sister Alex and all this stuff, but he's not making this journey about him. He is making this journey about them together. Whenever he wants to take a selfie, they're going to take it together. He is truly someone who is compassionate, and Madeline's energy to help him is spent because he will also spend energy to help her. When
It's
Madeline stops what
reciprocal,
she's,
not one-sided.
exactly. Whereas Oshiro was just this, you know, troubled soul. Quite literally, he was a ghost, but she was
Yeah.
this troubled soul that Madeline realizes again. It's the I can fix him. Let me stop. I want to, stop what I'm doing. I'm going to make him better. And Theo even says like, no, I'm not getting a great vibe from this guy. Let's just keep moving. And Madeline says, enough. I don't care what you think. I'm going to help him. And it ultimately sets things back, and it creates just another episode of trauma that Madeline keeps revisiting throughout the story.
What I like what the game does with this scenario as well, though, it doesn't. I almost feel like it doesn't tell the player to avoid this type of thing. Like it's not this thing specifically. What I mean is this is all part of Madeline's journey. She needed to see what happened when she tried to help Mr. Oshiro to realize, okay, I can't fix myself this way. Like it
Yes.
feels like a lot of the different parts of, I shouldn't say fix myself, manage myself this way or help myself this way. And a lot of the portions of the game is her realizing different ways that just don't work. And that ties in with the death counter that we were teasing at the
Mhm.
beginning of the episode, where I've never seen in a game where the gameplay mechanics of both the fact that the fact that they turn death into a mechanic to tell the story is incredible, because that's the whole point of this game is a journey of self-discovery, thousands of failures, like the whole, you are meant to die hundreds of times, hundreds of thousands of failures, because it all leads towards something, just like everything with Mr. Oshiro was a failure. Not necessarily per se, it was meant to be a stepping stone. And instead of those hundreds of thousands of deaths, or however many you get, they're not meant to be failures. They're meant to be stepping stones. I know I was saying failures, but I really meant, like, that's how you typically interpret them. But what this game is trying to help you realize is every one of those setbacks isn't necessarily a setback if you can learn from it, if you can push forward. And Madeline does that. She realizes that Mr. Oshiro was like, it was a waste of time for her to do that. But really, was it? Like, she realized that she can't fix people. But the reason I say, was it really a waste of time? Not only did she learn something about herself, Oshiro shows up at the end of the game as kind of like trying to, like, he's still not like out of his own world. He comes to the party and says, I want this strawberry pie at my hotel again. Like, he's still
Mm-hmm.
clinging on to that. So he's not out of the woods just yet. But it's the fact that Madeline clearly did something like resonated with him, that she did help him. It was at the detriment of herself, but I like how it doesn't make everything so one-sided. Like, don't help anyone just because if it doesn't help you out, that's a bad thing. Like, you should never go into anything like that, but at the same time, you should realize that not everything that you try to help yourself with is going to work. And so, and some of them are going to have setbacks, and everything with Oshiro is kind of the setback, because it leads to the falling out with her and Madeline, excuse me, and that causes everything to fall down, and that causes Madeline to throw Madeline all the way down to the bottom of the mountain again, and Madeline and Madeline have to come to grips with each other. I don't know. There's so much to bring. I feel like
There
we're
is.
just scratching the surface too. Like the whole, like everything in the mirror temple of just like seeing the dark, like the darkest sides of you. There's so much.
There really is. And coming to the point that video games are art, and especially a video game like this that just the developers pour so much of themselves and their soul into. I know you were trying to avoid the harsh terminology and you kept correcting yourself, but I mean, you were right. Failures. You sometimes you fail. You try to do something and it doesn't work. The moral of that all is don't let that stop you. If you
Mm-hmm.
try something and it doesn't work, start again. If you attempt to clear a level and you fall and you get another death on your death counter, you just reappear and try again. The most important thing is that you always keep trying, keep moving forward, don't give up. And that's the optimistic message that this game really gives you, is like, you'll have setbacks, you will have failures, you will have ugly parts of you that you don't want to accept. You'll have things that don't go well, things that aren't good for you. You'll have new trauma. You'll have all these things on your journey, but you're growing, you're learning, you're always getting something out of it. And there was one story that Lena Rain, the composer, mentioned, is that a fan actually reached out to her and mentioned that they were thinking of ending their own life, and then playing this game helped them reframe their mentality. Now, that's not to say if you're feeling suicidal, play a video game that'll fix everything for you. That's more,
That's a very specific anecdote. It's not
yes,
necessarily going to work for everyone.
exactly. Yeah. And that's the disclaimer I want to put on this right now. Like, this is not the magic cure video game, but it plays into that theme of this is teaching you that, or again, I'm not saying teaching you as in this is like, Maddie said, they did not consult professionals. This is not meant to be educational. This is meant to be anecdotal, but it's showing you that perseverance is what matters. bad things will happen, setbacks will happen, but keep trying. Just keep going, and eventually you can reach the top of the mountain. Eventually you can reconcile that part of you. Um, you mentioned how, as someone, you didn't know that this was a story about depression at first, and that there was just, other things that you could relate to in it. And that's absolutely true as well. Maddie Thorson, even in a pretty well known quote at this point, says that uh, the fans knew that this was a trans story before I did.
Yeah.
Um, and that's because so many of the themes in this resonate with the trans community and people at large who are reconciling a part of themselves. They're learning to accept who they are and how they want to be. And so many people struggle to truly accept themselves. And this is a really good story for, don't beat yourself up. You are not wrong. You are not the villain. You're not a terrible person. You're not a mistake. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. It's you. It's who you are. It is all part of you. And then that, I think, is just such a beautiful punchline, not punchline, a beautiful moral of the story
Mm-hmm.
is that Madeline isn't the villain. It's
Battling
not.
isn't bad.
She's not bad. And when Madeline and her get to really talk and understand each other, and Madeline learns to accept her, they they become they become one. And during the credit sequence, as they descend the mountain together, there's lots of you know illustrations of them collaborating and doing stuff together, and just realizing that you're now coexisting with your whole self rather
Mm-hmm.
than battling yourself. And I think that's why, again, this is a story about depression and anxiety, but this can be a story about anything, any part of you that you're not ready to accept.
I also feel like, and I'm not the voice that should be that, like, would be the one to relay this or confirm it, but I think from the way I've read from people online, and like especially Maddie Thorson, what is this game, besides just being about depression, it's also, I would assume, for the people in the LGBTQ plus community, it's about coming out too, like the 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 alter ego battle or whatever. It's not, that's something that Madeline is trying to hide. She wants to get rid of it. She wants to see it. She's shameful of it, and when she shouldn't be. It's part of her.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that's why this story, it's so it's almost ironic that Maddie, before she came out as trans and realized who she was, she didn't realize it at all. And it's so ironic that this whole game is about coming to grips with the side of yourself that you're trying to hide. Whether, for me, it wasn't about that. It was about coming to grips with, like, the darker sides of me. But it I almost feel like, for the people who are afraid to come out because it's so hard to do, because of the society that we live in, and how people in the LGBT community are treated, it almost feels like this is addressing that fear. I'm not gonna, I don't I almost feel uncomfortable to go any further, not because I think I'm wrong with this, but, like, I'm not part of the LGBT community, so I don't feel like I'm qualified to really make that assumption or make that statement. But that's kind of the vibe I understood. So if I'm anyone in that excuse me, anyone in that community, feel free to, like, call me out on it and educate me more. But it's just kind of my interpretation of it.
Yeah, and absolutely. And you mentioned how ironic it is that Maddie wrote this story without
Realizing.
really realizing so much about herself. But that's, I think, what makes this such a beautiful story, is that this isn't a story where the developer has everything figured out and they're just trying to preach it to you. this was a learning experience for her as well as she was making the game. She is making the game and understanding herself better. And, I think that's really lends to the artistic nature of it. It's really poetic to go on this journey. The game is about a journey of self-discovery, and at the same time, the developers going on a journey of self-discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just such a that just really lends to the strength of what this means. Um, and this game, that's what makes it really, really beautiful. I mean, the music is great, the art style is great, the gameplay I feel like is very well designed, but to me, the fact that this just has these heavy themes that mean so much to so many people. I saw another YouTube commenter talking about how playing this game helped them with the grief of losing a loved one. That's not depression. That's
Mm-hmm.
not being a member of the LGBTQ plus community. That's another take that somebody was able to take from this is, this is really about, again, this is a story about mental health. This is a story about us. This is a story about, who understanding who we are and growing and a journey of self-discovery and forgiveness and healing. It's really beautiful.
And I want to say real quick, like there's a blog post that Maddie Thorson wrote back in 2020 about her journey of kind of discovering who she is, and I screenshotted a small paragraph of it. I'm just going to read it real quick. Um, this is from her blog post. When I wrote Celeste, I sincerely still believed that I was cisgender, but I was nevertheless waist deep in gender feelings, among other anxieties. When Madeline looks in the mirror and sees her other self, when she attempts to abandon her reflection, who then drags her down the mountain, when the two reconcile and merge to become stronger and more complete, that was all unknowingly written from a trans perspective. So maybe if you're a cis person and you personally relate to Madeline, you shouldn't feel like we pulled one over on you. Instead, you could take this as an evidence that trans and cis feelings aren't so different, that the chasm between transness and cisness isn't such a wide gulf, and that most of the ways that trans existence is alien to you are a result of that are the result of unjust social othering and oppression. And I'm not going to go into all the more heavy topics of that, but I think that's spot on. Like that is this game can mean so many different things to so many people. And while this game ultimately ended up being Maddie realizing that she was transgender and realizing who she was, it doesn't mean that that's that for you. As she said, they didn't pull one over on you. They didn't pull one over
Right.
on you.
Yes.
It's just you. It's just you taking something out of this. For me, it literally, like I said before, it was realizing that I'm pretty sure I have clinical anxiety, and while I don't like that about myself, it is still something that is part of me, and I'm learning to not hate it. And this game has helped me a little bit, like specifically in preparation for this episode, because I didn't really think I had anxiety the first time I played it, and now since then it's just kind of reminding me that like it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just who I am. Like don't I shouldn't be upset at myself for having anxiety. It's just it is what it is, and you just kind of learn to manage it, type of thing. So, and that's what I got out of it. But the beauty of it is that anyone can get anything out of it. It's a really beautiful game, and more than that, it's just fucking fun, dude. It is a great, like, we're talking about some really heavy topics, but if you're not interested in this in-depth analysis, it is just fun as hell. Like the platforming feels so smooth. Something we didn't
So
talk about
smooth.
with the mechanics is just how good the control feels of this.
Oh,
Celeste controls
absolutely.
so wonderfully.
Yeah, it's a blast to play. I mean, everything feels very responsive. You jump when you expect to jump. You grab things when you expect to grab. I mean, and there's a reason this has such a robust speedrunning community, right? There's and one thing I thought was really interesting. I guess if we're shifting more into, like the actual gameplay again. Um, Maddy talked about wanting to take inspiration from actual rock climbing. And she said one of the things
Mm,
that was so beautiful about rock climbing is that there's a lot of ways to do it. And they wanted that freedom to move through. There's not just one path to go through every level. It's get creative with it. And that's a lot of the fun of it is, looking at it going, okay, so I jump here and then I can slide down this and dash off of that and I should make it to that platform. Figuring it out as you go is a really creative puzzle. And going back to the fairness of dying and all that in the game, it encourages you to experiment. You're not
hmm
unnecessarily punished for failing. You try something, didn't work, you just poof, and then you reappear on a platform and you do it again. And every time I play it, it's a lot about let me try to find something different. One thing I know that they said was they tried to add, like special ways through the levels just for the speedrunners,
hmm
but they tried to make it not the obvious way to do it. So rather than looking that up, sometimes I just look at it and go, okay, what is the speedy way to get through here? Just because there's
mm.
it, but it's a blast to play. It's so much fun. Yeah, it's got these really poetic, heavy themes and stuff like that, but it's just fun and it's beautiful.
And one last thing to tie the gameplay back into those themes, and then we can start wrapping up the episode. Um, the difficulty, like we said, you die a whole bunch of times, and it's kind of meant to show, like, oh, keep pushing on. You learn something every time, but it's also more than just that. It's more than just being like, keep on trying because you learn for every failure you have, it's another lesson learned. That's a major theme and a major part of what they're trying to show with this game. The other thing it's trying to show is that mental health is fucking hard. Like this game,
Mhm.
it like all the optimistic stuff we're talking about with how come to grips with the good and bad sides of yourself and being able to kind of almost very zen and buddhist of like being one with yourself type of thing, like all those things are in here and they're all important, and like everyone should try to live with the good and bad sides of themselves. However, what this game also illustrates that it's not easy to do that. It is very hard to come to grips with the negative side of yourself, the bad side of yourself. And like the death counter, if anything, shows how I mentioned before, it shows how hard you're working. It's not just how hard you're working to learn, it's also how hard you're working to better yourself. And just like every player is different, Ryan, when you play Celeste, your death count total is going to be different than mine. It could be higher,
Absolutely.
it could be lower. And just like in real life, everyone's journey is going to be different. Some people may have an easier path to being able to manage their mental health than other people, whether it's because financially they're able to afford a therapist or someone to help them out, or maybe just they're born with the good genetics where they don't have to deal with as many mental health issues as some other people who unfortunately have to have that, who has had that thrust on them. But everyone has to come to grips with the good and bad sides of themselves. And the death counter, if anything, just shows how much more you're working. It's a badge of honor, as I said at the beginning of the episode, and it's that badge of honor for a number of ways. One, showing how many times that you've made a mistake and learned from it, but also two, shows how much of a struggle you like. Be proud of your death counter because that's how much harder you had to work through to figure out yourself. Whether, and in that instance I'm talking about in real life, like your death counter in real life is just how much harder you've had to work to figure out yourself. So this game does it on two fronts. It's about your own personal progress on lessons learned, but it's also your own personal progress in how hard it is to figure out your own mental health.
Absolutely. And as you said, the difficulty of the game thematically ties into it, just like you said, because coming to terms with your mental health is fucking hard. It's not an
It's
easy
so
thing. And the really important theme, and we mentioned this earlier, is that at the end of the game, it's not over. Like, it's an ongoing struggle for Madeline. It's not like, all the stuff we talked about her accepting her other stuff. That's not the magic fix, right? That's not the end of all
Mm-hmm.
of it. But getting to that point is hard. Getting to the point where you can even accept yourself is hard. Um, and it never wants to talk down on anyone, which is really good. Um, I did want to add from the gameplay standpoint, one thing I realized we haven't talked about yet. And if anybody is listening to this going, wow, this sounds like a game I want to play, but I really struggle, or, I'm not able to play hard games, or I just I don't want that. They did add an assist mode. And
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to read the messaging that they put on the assist mode real quick, because I have it here in front of me, because I thought it was really good. Um,
Okay.
so when you first try to turn on assist mode, which is essentially like 5 different cheats that you can turn on, quote unquote. It's not really cheats. They call them assists. But you can get infinite lives, you can get infinite, dashes, invincibility mode, stuff like that. But the message they give you is: assist mode allows you to modify the game's rules to reduce its difficulty. This includes options such as slowing the game speed, granting yourself invincibility or infinite stamina, and skipping chapters entirely. Celeste was designed to be a challenging but accessible game. We believe that its difficulty is essential to the experience. We recommend playing without assist mode for your first time. However, we understand that every player is different. If Celeste is inaccessible to you due to its difficulty, we hope that assist mode will allow you to still enjoy it. And then it asks you if you want to turn assist mode on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that plays really well into, it is part of the experience, right? Celeste is supposed to be hard so that you get an appreciation for how hard this climb is. That said, everyone is different. Like you mentioned, some people are born on a different playing field than others.
Mm-hmm.
And what might be just a minor challenge to you, might be a lot harder for me, and maybe I can't. Maybe I'm incapable of doing it. So it's really good that they added that assist mode so that people can experience the story. They felt like this is something that as many people as possible should be able to pick up and play no matter what, and they should be able to get that story. If not,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the if not the experience of trying over and over and over and over again and just getting a little bit better each time, but at least being able to play and experience this game and the story. And I think that's a really good feature that they added. Um, I like that it is there, but it does not shame you for using it. It's not like Wolfenstein, where it comes at you with this like, oh, I'm a baby, put me on easy mode kind of stuff. It's not
Mm-hmm.
a difficult, it's not telling you like, play it on hard if you're, a real gamer. It's more, hey, we made this hard on purpose, but we understand that's not for everyone. So here's some assists.
And also remember, just because this game is difficult, it's a difficult 2D platformer. This, what you said kind of reminds me of the anecdote or the analogy of like how SATs are an awful metric to grade like intelligence or like educational aptitude and shit like that, because all SATs do is that it grades on one specific angle or one specific way. So if the SAT is who can climb the tree the fastest, and you have a squirrel and a fish, because everyone's different, they're all different
Yeah.
people. The fish isn't going to be able to climb the fucking tree, and the squirrel's going to do it in a minute. And the fish is going to be like, "Why the fuck can't I climb that tree?" And the squirrel will be like, "Well, yeah, why can't you climb that tree?" Um, in this analogy, if we're going with video games, maybe you're a fish and you don't have thumbs and you can't play 2D platformers, but maybe you could flop on an A button every now and then you can just progress through it nice. I don't know where I'm going with this
Yeah.
analogy, but the point I'm trying to make is everyone has different gaming strengths and weaknesses. So if you want to experience this game, and 2D platformers are just not something you can handle. And I don't mean that as a derogatory thing or a negative thing. It's some people just can't, like my wife, she not a big gamer per se, but she can't stand 2D platformers or anything that has like this kind of like level of um almost like tension. Like she likes more chill and relaxed games because that's what she wants to do. She couldn't play this. She would get so frustrated and wouldn't enjoy it. And then if you're not going to be able to enjoy the game, then you can't enjoy the story and the experience or the message it's trying to convey or relay. So yeah, it's a good way to have an assist mode on there. And one last thing I'll say, not related to any of this, but you mentioned before how like the you know, in like Doom and Wolfenstein, how it has, you know, like the baby mode, you know, oh, just a little baby playing type of thing. I wonder if someone could do a video essay that proves like Dark Souls bros and the Get Good crowd stems from that. I want to see if there's a connection there. I feel like there is somehow.
I mean, there's certainly some elitism in the gaming community, and I'm not calling people out who enjoy that. I will call people out who talk down on other people. Um,
Yeah.
we're all here to play games. We're all gamers. We love what we love, and there's no such thing as a real gamer. If you're playing a game and you enjoy it and you're passionate about it, you're a real gamer. You mentioned your wife. 2D platformers aren't for her. That's me. I mean, I said at the top of the show, when I first saw Celeste, I was like, that's not for me. I don't want a hard 2D platformer. Like, why would I want that? But I gave it a shot, and it resonated with me enough that I love it. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna go pick up Spelunky and love it. It doesn't mean that I'm gonna go play Super Meat Boy and love it. Like, you know, video games are personal. It's personal taste, and it's we all want different things. Sometimes you want that sense of, oh man, I beat my head up against this boss in Dark Souls for 4 hours and I finally beat him and I feel great. Awesome. Hey,
Hmm.
great for you. Some other people are like, hey, I worked all day and I want to come home and I want to take off my shoes and I want to get under a blanket and I'm going to play Animal Crossing, or I'm going to, just do something relaxing. I just want something story driven. There's no such thing as a real gamer. I think that's, a very elitist and terrible attitude to have. These are experiences for everyone, and if you enjoy them, I'm proud of you.
I mean, the only thing I would say I disagree with is that there is such a thing as a gamer. Everyone who likes to play games is a gamer.
Oh no, yeah. I mean, everyone's a gamer. I'm saying the real gamer. Like, it's
Oh
not
no,
like,
sorry, no, that's I mean that
yeah,
everyone is. There is such a thing as a real gamer. It's anyone who
yeah.
plays games.
I,
Anyone
I
who
guess I
plays.
could put air quotes around that. The
There
real
you
gamer
go.
concept. Yes, yeah.
No, but I'm with you. But all right, man, I think we should start wrapping up this episode, though.
Okay.
This has been an absolutely wonderful conversation on Celeste, and I really enjoyed being able to dive into its themes with you. Uh, Thank you so much for joining me, man. This was a lot of fun. So, final thoughts. Let's wrap this up with some final thoughts. Like final thoughts on Celeste. I'll start, and I want to give you the final word because you are the guest. I want to make sure that everything you want to convey about the game gets to be what the listeners get to hear. So, for myself, this game is wonderful. I everything that we've been talking about it for over an hour and a half now. It is an absolutely wonderful game. I adore it to pieces. It I I'm going to kind of parody something that I said in the Ori episode that's not coming out for months, for reasons that I know will be that must sound confusing right now. But I'm going to keep it
Keep
vague just to
teasing that Ori episode. You're going to get the
just
hype
keep.
train going.
Yeah, I know, right? But there are very few games that I think marry story and gameplay really well. Oh, actually, no, sorry. The point I'm comparing it to Ori is there are very few games that the progression of difficulty feels so fluid that when you're playing it and you're doing some insane things and you don't realize that you're doing it, like there are so few games where the difficulty progression is so smooth that when you get to the harder parts of the later stages of the game and you see a platforming challenge or you see the challenge in front of you and you start doing shit with muscle memory you didn't know you had, that is like peak game design to me, where you didn't realize how much internal muscle memory you have gained from playing the game until you see a challenge that you've never seen before and you one shot it. I'm not saying every challenge is like that, but there's definitely moments in Celeste where you'll see a screen and be like, okay, this looks really hard, but I know how they want me to do it, so let me try it. And then you do it in one shot and you sit back, you go, holy crap, how did I do that? I love games that are able to do that, and Celeste has that difficulty curve perfectly. And the last thing I'll say is just I've never seen a game that this is specific to Celeste. The other one I've seen in both Ori and this, but this point I want to make is specific to Celeste. I've never seen a game that marries how the gameplay mechanics and difficulty to its story. I've never seen a game do that, marry those two things together so expertly. And Celeste nails that. And I'm not going to repeat why, because we just spent the last like 40 minutes going into why, but it's wonderful. So I can't say enough good things about this game. Ryan, throwing it over to you. Final thoughts on Celeste.
I, came into this talking about I love this game. It's definitely my favorite indie game of all time, and I mentioned it resonates very deeply with me and my experiences, and the story, the music, the I agree with you completely as well. The game design is phenomenal. I mentioned, having that mini game with the seekers that teaches you how to play the game, but it's not even just that. It's the entire game is just intuitive, and you don't even realize how much you've learned as you're learning it, and you really are getting better at the game the entire time, and you don't even think about it. It's just, oh, why did that make sense to me? I didn't even know that I knew how to do that. And that's just,
Mm-hmm.
that is expert game design in my mind, and that they deserve all of the praise for that. But artistically, musically, story wise, I can't say enough good things about Celeste, and what it has meant for me and what it has helped me frame in my own mentality, but also just being an enjoyable experience, being something good. And I really would urge anybody who is listening to the things that we've said in this podcast and thinks it's interesting, but like me would think, I'm not really interested in a 2D platformer, give it a try if you can. If there's any way that you can come across it, I think it's on Game Pass if you have that on Xbox. It goes on sale for super cheap, but honestly, this game deserves the full price. Uh, it's really a game that can resonate with a lot of people, and even people who otherwise might not feel that it's for them. And that's, again, I could put another hour and a half on this show just talking about all the things I loved about this game, but I really really enjoy it.
It's just so good. It's just so good. I don't know if there's any other way we could possibly end the episode except on that note. Like we both love this game. Go check it out. Yeah, I got nothing. So let's do our shout outs now, Ryan. Let's do our final plugs and everything here, and we will send off our listeners to whatever they're listening to next. So Ryan, where can the good people find you online? Is there anything you'd like to promote? Is there any social media you'd like to plug? If there's nothing, that's fine, but I always like to give my guests the opportunity to shout out their socials or anything they'd like to plug.
I'm in the process of trying to get my own content started. I haven't quite gotten anything out there yet, but it's coming soon, TM. But you can always find me. Usually I'm using the username Paperclips with two A's, so PAAPERCLIPS. And that's what I'm using on YouTube. That's what I use on social media. If anyone wants to, reach out to me and let me know if they like what I said. If they don't like what I said, I'm always up to talk about it.
All right. As for myself, as usual, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to email me, you can email me stillloadingcontact@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can do so in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review, which honestly really helps me out a lot. It helps more people find the show, and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I like feeling warm and fuzzy. Who doesn't? That would honestly mean the world to me if you give it a 5-star rating and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whichever, because it does help more people find the show, and it would really mean a lot to me. But if you want to support the show monetarily, which I also wouldn't mind, but I also understand, times are tough, but I have a Patreon, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For $1 a month, you'll get all the episodes a little bit earlier at a better bit rate / audio quality, along with patron voting rights for quarterly polls, which helps guide the direction of the show. At $4 a month, you'll get everything I mentioned prior, as well as access to 2 mini episodes, which are about 20 minutes. They run about 15 to 20 minutes each, and there's 2 of them every month. And then for $5 a month, you'll get everything I mentioned before, plus access to Still Bonding, which is my James Bond review podcast where me and a bunch of friends bond over 007. And at the time this episode's coming out, I want to say GoldenEye will be either already out or soon to be out on the feed. So yeah, patreon.com/stillloadingpod. And that's it. That's all I got for you for this episode of Still Loading. Thank you all so much for listening. Ryan, thank you once again for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been great.
And with all that said, listeners, I will see you all next time.